I hope everyone survived without too much damage to themselves or their homes. We appreciate the fact that we really are glad you're here now, and hope that this finds y'all safe and healthy. Our speaker today is Kathy DeYoung, and our program chairperson will be introducing her in just a minute. But I did want to talk a little bit about who we've got coming up as far as speakers go. My name is Kathy Gresham. I write as KP Gresham, by the way, and I'm your president, which is saying something because this is such an awesome organization. Next week, we will, month, on March the 14th, March 14, we will be having the Honorable Robert J. Pittman, the U.S. District Court Judge for the Western Texas District, speaking to us. And before that, he was the attorney for that same district, the U.S. attorney for that same district. He has a varied and marvelous career. When he was a district attorney, he was in charge of following up on the Mary Madeline O'Hare? Murray, okay. O'Hare killing, disappearance and then killing. And we heard a little bit about that also from Billy Kring a couple of years ago, because he was involved in hunting the people down that killed her. Anyway, then in April, that'll be April 11th, we have best-selling author Kate Lawley, who also writes as Kate Barre, and she will talk about the logistics of self-publication. So it's basically a self-publication 101 course. And I'm really excited about that because I'm self-published and I really want to know, okay, what has to happen when to really do a good opening, etc. You all know what that route can be like sometimes. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kelly Manfredini to pretty please introduce our speaker. Anybody have any questions for what Sync's up to? Okay, on we go. Kelly.
Can't hear you, Kelly.
Kelly, you're still muted. Nah, you're good now. There you go.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. I don't know why it wasn't muted, but whatever. Peters. I'm Kelly. I write as KM Hodge, and I am your vice president / not supposed to be program person, and I am program person. And I am so excited that Kathy DeYoung has offered to speak to us today about her experiences as a former LAPD fingerprint analysis. I have had the pleasure of listening to her speak many times, and every time it's something different, and I learned something truly amazing and awesome. And I think that you guys are all going to really enjoy hearing her stories, and she is great at answering questions. Her book, Life in the Trenches, is amazing. It's on my shelf somewhere. I meant to grab it, but then my internet died. So I didn't grab it yet, but you have to, there she's holding it up. You have to read it. It is the most entertaining read. I read it in like almost one sitting because I couldn't put it down. It's awesome. So I'm super excited to introduce Kathy DeYoung to talk to you guys today.
Hi.
Hello, Kathy.
Sorry, but
Welcome.
there we go. Let me put my eyeballs on.
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Kathy, as you know. I worked for Los Angeles Police Department Scientific Investigation Division Latent Print Unit for almost 7 years. I did over 6,000 crime scenes during that time period. I averaged between a slow day, 3 crime scenes, up to 12 crime scenes every day. And our unit actually responded to almost 200 crime scenes every 24 hours, which was only 10 to 15% what the police officers were going to. So a little bit of the dark side of LA that people don't actually realize. It was crazy. I did over 200 single, double homicides. I actually went to a triple and two triples and one quadruple homicide, and did probably 30 bank robberies, et cetera, et cetera. Surprisingly, I have an art school background. I studied at Parsons, but I also have a science background because my father was a chemist at UT and raised me to love science and the arts. And I also did some freelance as a private investigator. Prior to my life in crime, as I like to call it, I worked in Hollywood doing actors' headshots, and then worked briefly in aerospace, working with NASA, JPL, Rockwell, Lytton, doing photo recon and development, which was really interesting, just the photography of their development. So that's me. But back to Crime Lab, and I think you might have some questions about the private investigation stuff. That was a brief adventure. It's definitely interesting, quotation marks, interesting. But the Crime Lab is usually what I speak the most about. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and start. I like to start out with one little part from my book that kind of is a neat way to open, kind of summed up my introduction to a whole different world from what you expect. If you choose to accept this position, you'll be exposed to, but not limited to, processing dead bodies and body parts, which may have communicable diseases, working alone at night in the housing projects, going into drug manufacturing labs containing hazardous and unstable chemicals, which could explode at any time, handling hazardous materials, narcotics and narcotic paraphernalia, firearms and live ammunition, among any other number of dangerous situations that may come up. We will provide you with body armor, but you may not carry any sort of weapon, not even pepper spray. Please initial and date here. So, you think that you can handle working for a paramilitary organization? Little did they know, hidden away under my tailored black pinstripe suit was multiple tattoos and 12 piercings, including tongue, temporarily removed for the interview. Only a few hours before, the long red hair, so neatly pulled back in a little bun, was not quite yet red, but rather bright passion purple. I think the question is, can the police department handle me? And skip to a few weeks later. After being hired, the supervisor approaches me and inquires if I speak any additional languages because we get bilingual pay. And I answered, no, but I swear in 6. It's gonna be a bumpy ride. So that was my kind of introduction, the welcome to working in LA. We have 20 different police divisions all over Los Angeles. So I could be anywhere from the Golden Triangle, Brentwood, Beverly Hills. They have their own technical police department, but we did a lot around the Hill area with them, all the way down to South Central and the Harbor, the Valley, East LA. Sometimes I'd be in all the neighborhoods just in one day, driving around like crazy. I drove an average of 100 to 200 miles sometimes just in one watch, depending how many crime scenes I had. Does anybody have any questions, or I can tell some other stories, or crickets? Well, trying to think what would be a good story. Let's see. Oh, this one right here. It's called You Always Remember Your First. And when you hire on with the Crime Lab, they start you in training in the classroom, and then you go into the field with a trainer for approximately 130 hours, and then they keep elevating the crimes. You start out with residential burglaries, and then you move on, business burglaries, robberies, on up into bank robberies, rapes, homicides. So when they were trying to get me signed off for homicides, they sent me down to South Central, and we don't call it that anymore. Now we call it Central LA, but I'm old school. I love South Central Los Angeles. That was a big part to me that I really chose to work down there the most because they needed me the most. And so they sent me down there to train to learn how to do homicides. And I proceeded to do 8 in one weekend, which that was pretty impressive. My very first homicide I went to was a double, and it was an 18-year-old male who the youth minister of his church had been molesting him for approximately 6 years. And he finally decided, after reaching out to his uncle, reaching out to the church, not getting enough help, that he thought as soon as he turned 18, he was old enough to buy a firearm, went and got a rifle, went to the church, shot the youth minister, and then went home, shot his uncle for not helping him, and then proceeded to call us and tell us what happened, and sat on the bed waiting for us to get there to come arrest him. And that was just one of those cases that the victim is a victim, the bad guy is a victim, and it's just really heartbreaking. And that was a huge introduction into mitigating circumstances. It was just a terrible thing. And LAPD actually stood up on the kid's behalf, even though we were appalled at what he had done. We fought for him to get medical care and to be hospitalized instead of going to prison. And sadly, I didn't get to find out what happened after the trial. So that's very typical for us, that we'll do our cases, process the scene, do any lab work, and then end up hopefully going to trial, and then we never hear anything again. And in the meantime, we've already done, before it even goes to trial, 100, 200 cases in the meantime. It's really fast. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay. Oh, Helen, you go first.
Well, okay, I just wondered, do you testify at trials?
Yes. I was testifying once about every 6 months. I received probably 200 or 300 subpoenas. They don't usually need fingerprints to come in. The DA once told me they've never lost a case that fingerprint people testified on, that we are always the secret weapon nail in the coffin. We do have a lot of training for testifying. We take moot court classes, training in the classroom, run through mock trials. We study our answers and make sure that we have good answers that the jury will understand. Funny things happen at trials, like we're told to never wear red. And that's actually a direct result from the O.J. Simpson trial, because Furman wore red and they hated him. And so we were told never wear red. LAPD, you'll find, I think most police departments are superstitious, which is really funny, but we're very superstitious. I see Francine. Did you raise your hand? Oh, scratching an itch. Thomas.
Oh, tell us a superstition or two that you're referring to.
Oh, a great one is I was working a bank robbery with the robbery homicide division, and LA is the bank robbery capital of the world. And we typically have, I always tell people, do not go in a bank between 12 and 2 on a Friday, because chances are it's going to get robbed. And if it's going to get robbed, that's when it's going to happen. And so for some reason, we went to a robbery on, it was either a Monday or a Wednesday. And as I was done processing the scene and had all my fingerprints, I was checking on the FBI and robbery homicide right before I was leaving. So you always, check them in with them because they think they're running the scene. They're not, it's me. But the crime lab always runs the scene. It's all about what we find, but we let them think they're in control. And as I was leaving, I said goodbye to robbery homicide and said, well, I'll see you Friday. And he turned white and said, you just jinxed us. And needless to say, come Friday, there he was at the bank waiting for me, yet another robbery. As soon as I walked in, he yelled at me, you caused this. This is your fault. You jinxed us. And you'll just find lots of little things like that. I figured out real quick, if I ever even thought about having to print people at the jail. The county hospital, county USC hospital, there's a secret floor there. They actually have a 13th floor, which, no one ever knows about the 13th floor, if there actually is one. They do have one, but you can't get to it. That you have to have special security to let you in, and you go through an armored door, an actual bank armored door. And when the sheriffs that are guarding the door let it slowly open for you to come in, you have to, if you're carrying weapons, which we obviously didn't carry weapons, you check it in your guns or whatever you're carrying and watch the door slowly open, and you're dreading it. We hated printing prisoners at the hospital. And so on this 13th floor, I'm losing my train of thought. Because now I'm thinking of all these other stories. I do that. I think of like 100 stories, like standing there waiting for the door open, and they bring through a bunch of prisoners, and all of a sudden the nurse says, "Everybody stand back. This one has bugs." We all kind of go, "Whoop."
Oh, great.
Yeah, or getting locked in a room by myself with a prisoner. And next thing you know, normally there's other prisoners with me when I go into a room to print them. And this one was all by himself. So I was suspicious, but didn't ask the nurse if there was any issue or anything. And so I print him. And luckily I had my mask on, I had my gloves on. I was being very careful because here I am all by myself, locked up with this male prisoner. And I would finish up and bang on the door to get let out because I'm locked in. And as I'm coming out, the nurse mentions that he has full-blown AIDS and tuberculosis. So you never know what you're going to get exposed to. We had people in the crime lab catch MRSA. It was crazy. We did a lot on Skid Row, and sadly, the people that live there are just exposed to everything. It's a real tragedy and breaks your heart when you go there. I would always be greeted with people running up to me, "Who died? Who died?" Because they mistake me for the coroner, who looks exactly like me. And so that always caused a lot of commotion when we would show up and work together, that people thought that was pretty crazy. Since I lost my complete train of thought of what I was originally telling you about the hospital.
You were talking about superstitions, but just for the record, we have a question that came in.
Yes, I think
This is from Wendy. It was back to when you were talking about Prince, and that you never lost a case on Prince, or you always won a case on Prince, whatever
Yes.
that was. Okay. Her question is LAPD so specialized that you only did Prince, not collecting other potential evidence?
Excellent question. Most crime labs that I've had the experience to visit, everybody does everything. LAPD, because we handle so many crime scenes and just constantly on the move, that we all specialize in something. We have photographers, we have fingerprint experts, we have people that only do DNA, we have people that do tire track marks. And so when a scene comes in, the detectives will decide, pardon me, my nose keeps itching. The detectives will decide who all they need. And then when we get there, we kind of regroup. I've been known to call in photographers to take pictures of stuff. Since I have a degree in photography, they never questioned me calling in the photographers. But I can't pick up a camera because we're all specialized, and now it's a union issue. And so I actually had a photographer who knew me private sector when we were both doing aerospace, actually asked me to take the photos at the scene because he knew it was a quadruple homicide and they were super important, and he was intimidated. So he had me do it. And he said, I won't report you to the union. Just please do these for me because I want them done right. We're all family. So, we watch out for each other, take care of each other. But yes, everybody's definitely specialized. I had the most experience there because I had the fingerprint background. I had the photography background. And when I was in school, I did study forensics. So I learned, basic DNA and all of the other things also, which kind of gave me an advantage. Thomas.
Okay.
Not carrying a weapon of any kind would have been a non-starter for me.
Yes.
Was there any case in which you were assaulted on the job?
I've been shot at 4 times, never been hit. I always think if they really truly wanted to hit me, I would have been shot. They did show us body armor, which is really great. Body armor makes you look like you have a weapon. So I didn't wear the body armor because to me that was a giant giant bullseye on my back if I was wearing body armor, because now they assume you have a gun. I did carry a knife, which technically was against the rules, but I had to retrieve a lot of bullets out of, doors and things like that, or cut away. I've been known to actually cut pieces of doors and bring them with me. One time I had a whole picnic bench brought with me from a rape scene. And so that was definitely a problem. A lot of police departments do let their forensic people carry guns, but in LA, they figured if you have a gun, you will be shot at. But I was shot at anyway. I had a terrifying experience at a church once. Pardon me, my nose allergies. Yay, Texas. I am a native Texan. We were talking about that earlier. Houston, Daughters of the Republic of Texas, but I was raised in LA. I was processing a church and the minister wanted to go do something because it takes a while with a big location like that. And so I was finishing up and I was looking for the minister to help him lock up and tell him, what I found, who to contact to, get the results of the case and all of that. And I'm starting to walk out to my car and I hear somebody screaming obscenities. I'll just say that, I won't use all the language. And so I'm looking around, I'm in the heart of Watts, which, like I mentioned earlier, I love South Central. But LAPD has a bad history there. They're not very well liked. So I figure, okay, someone knows I'm here. They don't like LAPD. I'm possibly in danger because he's yelling the F word and I'm going to kill you. And I can't see where he's at. So I'm looking around, there's all these apartments all the way around the church that I'm at, and I can't see anything. There's no open windows, nobody's moving. It's completely quiet. I'm down at the end of a cul-de-sac. And so I'm looking around. It's like, okay, well, my car is about 100 feet. My bulletproof vest is in the trunk. Yay me, because I never wore it, brain surgeon. So I'm thinking, can I outrun whoever this is and get to my car in time and lock myself in the car and call for backup? Because I couldn't reach the phone in the church because I couldn't find the minister and the office was locked. So I decide, okay, let's run. I put down my kit and just start running as fast as I can to the car, unlock the car, jump in, and I'm sitting there and then I'm having a moment to listen. And I can pinpoint right across where he's at, this apartment building. My car's right here. The church is right here. It's the apartment literally right here. So I'm listening and that guy is watching a football game. So I guess he's losing money, but woo, that was scary. And we have occasions like that just, you never know what's going to happen. Anybody else have questions?
I wouldn't mind you kind of talking us through when someone is murdered or there's a robbery. The police get on the scene first, and then you get a call, you have a supervisor. How does that work? How many people are generally on a team for a murder? We are writers. So like, what steps do you go through as you approach the scene while you're there? And how does all of that go?
Okay. The call comes into the police officers first. And back when I was working for LAPD, sorry that I have all these flashing hands at the bottom of the screen. If it's making you seasick, I'll tip it a little more. I tend to talk with my hands. The police officers get the call to 911. And back then, one of the problems was, and you hear this all the time, it took LAPD so long to get there. Well, if you're calling from a cell phone, the cell phone's going to the highway patrol. And then the highway patrol has to figure out who you're trying to call. Orange County Sheriffs, LA Sheriffs, San Bernardino Sheriffs, Riverside Sheriffs, LAPD, because California Highway patrols the entire state. And they know that you're Southern California, kind of LA area, but it's a huge area. So once they figure out where to transfer your call, then you go to the 911 officers that are specifically LAPD. There are police service representatives, PSRs, and they get the call. So now they have to figure out which division you're at. So they're asking you where you're at and bringing you up, typing away, trying to figure out on the map where you're at and get a location, because LAPD is 20 divisions. And what, 9 million people, over 100 miles across. And so once they pinpoint where you're at, then they transfer the call, or they get on the phone and patch it through to the local police division, who they have a 911 officer. This is totally socialism in its best. If everybody has a job. And sometimes you're lucky and it goes through more directly, but at that point in time, it was going from 1 to 1 to 1. And so 3 911 operators later, you're finally with the police division, and that 911 operator is typing it into all of the vehicles in the field for that division. And then whoever's the closest and available, they'll see all the calls come up in their screen, and whoever can reach that call the fastest will respond. And sometimes if it's not a high priority call, it could take, back in the day, up to 6 hours to respond. If it's a hot call, like a homicide or something like that, when they are ready for us, sometimes they'll call us in right away. We get there and it's still a hot scene. I had a partner that was processing a scene a little too quickly. They let her go in immediately because they thought they had cleared the scene for us. The police officers always make sure everything is safe. She goes in, she's following blood droplets up the stairs, gets to the top of the stairs where this entire family had just been shot and killed, and they thought the suspect had left. Well, he attempted to commit suicide and had blown off his jaw and was hiding in the upstairs closet that my partner proceeded to open and find him. And so little things like that are always exciting and get your blood running. Usually the scene's safe before we get there. So back to that, the police officers will go to the scene, and if we know it's a big scene, multiple officers will show up. Austin PD always sends 2 units, 2 individual police cars with 1 officer in each police car. LAPD typically sends 1 police car with 1 officer. And then they'll decide if they need to send more. But if we know it's a hot scene, they'll automatically send more. And if anybody's driven in LA, from the moment they get that call, and they figure out where it's at and look it up in GPS and get ready and start driving over there, an hour is going to pass, because you can't even get across LA when there's no traffic in less than an hour. If there's traffic, it could take anywhere from 2.5 to 3 hours just to respond. So that's a slowdown there that people forget to take into account. But there's logistics. Once the police officer gets there, he will try to locate, I hate to use this term, but they say the victim. They'll try to find the person at the scene to find out what happened, make sure they're safe, make sure there's no suspect there. When they first get there, they call in code 6, which means I'm at the location. And if they actually don't call back within an hour, 911 will follow up. And like, I'm 2 Henry 168 Adam. And so you'll get 90 Charles 2 Henry 168 Adam. Are you clear? And if I don't answer, we get it again. 90 Charles 2 Henry 168 Adam. Are you clear? And if I don't answer, they'll send police officers out to find me, because now they assume I'm in danger. And I also have a panic button on my radio, which I accidentally set off once, and all of West LA showed up to save me because they love me. I can tell you later about a scene that I did for them that I was actually awarded a Medal of Honor for, and you can read about it. It's all over the internet. But of course, this is a good fact to know. Get the facts right. As we've seen the last 4 years with the media fighting the other media, Apparently the scene, it's called the Hillside Burglars, went on for 3.5 years. I think it was approximately $30 million worth of money stolen, property stolen, et cetera, from the Golden Triangle, Brentwood, Bel Air. These guys were highly organized. They had night vision goggles, walkie-talkies, ninja suits, wore gloves, never left any evidence anywhere. For 3 years, we chased them. They were stealing entire safes from these homes and breaking into the safes. I hate printing safes. You're not going to get fingerprints from safes. They're textured. But these guys were smart because all these homes are 2 stories. No one has burglar alarms on the 2nd story. So they would bring a ladder, hook up the ladder, climb up to the 2nd story, walk into the house. And then carte blanche access to all kinds of movie stars and ambassadors from other countries and just crazy, crazy stuff. So we chased them for 3.5 years. And I found the only physical evidence ever recovered. And in the magazine article, they say it was DNA. It was a fingerprint. DNA and fingerprints fight each other. We have a little love-hate thing going on that we always argue about that. But it was funny at that scene because the lieutenant, when I got there, he said, you know how it's going to happen. You're not going to find any fingerprints. They wore gloves. Just throw some powder around and get out. Don't waste your time. Well, no one tells me what to do. They ought to know that by now. And so I went in, did my scene, and like an hour later, the lieutenant comes through and he's like, why are you still here, DeYoung? Get out of here. You're wasting time. You know they wore gloves. I said, don't worry. I'm almost done. I just want to walk back through one more time. And as I did, there were all these gowns in the closet that went all the way to the floor. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to check the floor. And I pushed all the gowns back and there was a plexiglass jewelry box on the floor against the wall. No one saw it. So I pulled it out and I start processing it. And here comes the glove print. You can see, boop, 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 that part of the thumb, because where he grabbed it like this to pull it out. And the next thing you know, I see a little bit of a tear, and lo and behold, a fingerprint. So I got the entire tip of his thumb, and we got a hit in APHIS. And for the first time after 3.5 years, we knew who the leader of these guys were. And so I was awarded a medal right there. Whoops, right there. A gold medal of honor and appreciation for solving that crime scene after all that time. And I wasn't even supposed to be there. They had already told me to go home. But I'm, like I said, never listen to them. I know my job. The cops don't. No offense to them. They're supposed to secure, and the detectives come in afterwards and think, but they don't know forensics. And so the forensic people have to run the scene and not listen to anybody else. And that scene actually went kind of crazy. You won't find this written anywhere because this is kind of a hidden, not hidden thing that we don't talk about. So of course I'm going to tell you because I don't work there anymore. I can tell you. Did you see the movie SIS? Special Investigations Section? Terrible movie. True unit. They're called the Execution Squad. That's what we call them because they follow career criminals around and wait for them to do their thing. Usually it's takeover robberies. They did a Jack in the Box case that I was working. Thrifties, remember Thrifties drugstore when it turned into Rite Aid? They were robbing those, doing takeover robberies. And it was funny, the getaway vehicle was always a white Bronco to honor O.J. Simpson, which sense of humor. But those are 2 of the cases that come off the top of my head besides the Hillside Burglars.
Just for the record, we are having some questions come in. So,
okay.
In fact, I think I've got 5 or 6 of them here.
Okay.
So here we go. We'll start with this. And it actually kind of goes along with the SIS thing you were just talking about. From Wendy, I know professionals gag at police TV movies, but which show is getting it right the most?
I hate to say it, and it's not because of the obvious connection, NCIS.
Now,
Abby.
oh wait, just for the record, tell them why. Tell them why you hate to say it. Tell them your background there.
The character Abby on NCS, I'll say rumor has it because we don't want to step on toes and they didn't want to pay me. So they won't admit that it's me, but I actually inspired the character Abby on NCIS. When they were developing the show, they wanted it to be accurate. So they came to observe us. And I was training upstairs in analytical. So I was allowed to wear my street clothes. So I had on, in fact, the same red plaid skirt I have on right now is the same skirt I was wearing that day, my favorite skirt. And I had on, Doc Martens and fishnets and a sweater with little skulls on it because it's cold in the crime lab. Normally I wear the BDUs, black BDUs, and a lab coat, gloves, mask. But that day I was allowed to wear my street clothes. So I come trotting down the sign in for the beginning of my watch. And my supervisor comes over and says, "You don't be seen, stay upstairs. There's writers from Hollywood coming today, and we don't need them to see you dressed like that." Well, again, you can't tell me what to do, because then I'm going to do it 3 times and take pictures. So of course, I'm like, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. And I went and got my folder and all the stuff I needed, went upstairs, immediately came back down because I wanted to see the writers. I forgot my pencil. And then I forgot my subpoena. And then I forgot a folder. And I kept coming down until the writers finally spotted me, pulled me outside the door and interviewed me. And I was just like, yay, mission accomplished. And totally forgot all about it. Went upstairs, did my work. Didn't even know what TV show it was or anything. A few months later, I'm at a crime scene and I get, "You look like Abby." And I was like, "I don't know her, sorry." And then the next crime scene I go to, "You look like Abby." Like, "Sorry, don't know her, never heard of her." And this kept happening and kept happening and kept happening. So finally, oh, that reminds me that I never finished explaining about the process of how we go out to the crime scenes. I ramble because I think like this. So finally I complained at a crime scene to the photographer, "Why does everybody keep saying I look like Abby?" And he cracked up and said, "You don't know? They based a character on you." And so I'm the original Abby.
Love it. Okay,
And
our
so-
next question.
Yes.
This is from a friend of yours called Kelly Manfredini.
Hi, Kelly.
Fun fingerprint facts. What are some ways to manipulate prints?
Yes. You know how on your phone you have the fingerprint access? Well, my friend's baby actually picked up her phone and accessed it with the fingerprint access, because even though fingerprints are epigenetic, they're partially genetic and partially from the conditions during a fetal development during pregnancy. There are ways to manipulate it. I always tell people, if I want in your phone, I'm just going to get a gummy bear and I can access it, because I'll get your fingerprint on a gummy bear and I can defeat such a simple system as that doing that. A great story about manipulating fingerprints too is, do you remember when the lady went to the thrift store to buy her friend who lived in a mobile home a piece of art for a birthday present? And as a joke, she found this huge painting, like this big painting. And she said it was the ugliest painting she'd ever seen. And it was $2, I think. She talked them down to like $1.50, gave it to the lady who was a teacher. And the lady proceeded to have a heart attack and said, "This is a Jackson Pollock." And so they took it to have it authenticated, and they actually took fingerprints off of the back of the painting where he had been touching it to, do the mounting and everything. And they probably used super glue, because canvas is a textured item and it's hard to get fingerprints from, but they actually lifted a fingerprint off of the back of the Jackson Pollock, and that's how they authenticated it, which is hysterical. And she sold it for, of course, several $1 million. Didn't need it for her mobile home over the sofa, which is funny because years later, another Jackson Pollock showed up and they didn't quite believe this one was real. So the same guy said, oh yeah, I did the fingerprints on the first one. Let me do it. So he's like, yeah, the fingerprint matches perfectly. Here comes a pet peeve of mine. So he shows them the fingerprint and says, see, look, it's a perfect match. And so he proceeds to show, I think, a couple fingerprints, and they were all identical. Well, if I go like this, boop, 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 those 3 fingerprints, even though they're all mine, they're not all identical, because the matrix on my finger, which can be sebaceous oil, which is the oily sweat, or it can be eccrine, which is saltwater sweat, just normal sweat. Usually it's saltwater because that's what you excrete on your fingers. But if you're oily, obviously you're going to transfer. All 3 of those fingerprints are going to be slightly different because the amount of matrix on my finger changed from print to print. The third one will be a little less than the first one. The pressure changed. I didn't necessarily do it exactly the same on each one. So each fingerprint's can be slightly different. All of the fingerprints they recovered from the second Jackson Pollock were identical. So they decided it was a fake. When they compared those fingerprints to the ones from the first Jackson Pollock, they were identical to that too. He made a stamp and was stamping the fingerprints onto the Jackson Pollock. So it did turn out to be a fake, and they proved it because the fingerprint evidence, which was supposed to prove it, disproved it. And then a funny story that leads into that is after I left the crime lab, I went and worked at an art gallery for a while, and my job was recovering artwork for the gallery and whatnot. I actually found a Diego Rivera in the dollar bin. I was like, I have a dollar, but they immediately scooped it up and took it to auction. But before they got the Diego Rivera away from me, I licked my thumb to put my DNA and a little bit of oil and put it on the back of that Diego Rivera, just as an homage to those 2 scenes and the irony of the fingerprint and whatnot. So down the road, when they do the fingerprints to figure out if that's a real Diego Rivera or not, I'm going to come up.
Okay.
So you can
Next.
definitely manipulate.
Next question comes from Pat Kelly. In movies, criminals often wipe their fingerprints off surfaces to remove their trace. How easy is it to do that in reality? Can you detect from your investigation that someone wiped their prints?
Yes and no. Fingerprints, because they're saltwater and or oil, salt water is going to evaporate in heat, typically under 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and over 70% humidity is ideal for fingerprints to not evaporate. Obviously, sebaceous prints, oil-based prints, can stay until someone smears them. That would take forever for them to evaporate because of the oil base. People definitely wipe down guns. That cracks me up. You see that every TV show imaginable, they're wiping down the guns, the tobacco firearms and alcohol, tobacco firearms. They, ATF, we'll just call them that. Sorry, lack of sleep, lots of caffeine. Not kapow, but lots of caffeine. The ATF did a study, I believe it was 95, where they took 100 firearms, or 1,000 firearms. Sorry, memory's kicking in. 1,000 firearms and tested them for fingerprints. They recovered only 10% identifiable fingerprints from the firearms. 1 in 10 guns had an identifiable fingerprint. Ammunition was less than 1%. Just because of the nature of the way you hold ammunition, you're putting it in to clips or whatever, you're touching the stamp head, and that's got the little emblem. You can possibly get some from the sides of the larger ammo. I've seen it happen. It's rare. Guns, Guns have bluing on it in order to prevent them from rusting. Well, the same process would prevent fingerprints. Also, the grips have texture on them, you know, so I don't have any guns right here. There used to be a gun in here that we were printing parts for. Just the nature of the way you hold a firearm, you're not going to leave good fingerprints, but it does happen. I actually recovered 2 fingerprints from a homicide that I did. That the detective said, just throw powder on it. You know, you're not going to get anything. I want to send this to firearms and they'll handle the case for you. And I'm like, let me do my job. I'll be back. So I go, and first I told him, well, you need to send it to get super glue. Super glue is definitely a real thing. Super glue is your friend. Except don't breathe it in like they do on CSI because you'll die. Super glue in its liquid state is pretty harmless. At 180 degrees, it turns to a gaseous state, and now it's cyanatic. But on CSI, my favorite episode, the guy is going like this, printing a wall that close to his face with super glue, fuming the wall. I'm like, oh, great, you're going to the hospital. Little details like that make us insane. So anyway, no, I don't mean to disrespect him. The detective tells me don't do super glue, just throw powder on it. I want it to go to firearms because you know you're not going to get any fingerprints. There are actually 2 guns. It was a homicide, a 16-year-old kid visiting LA from out of state, walked down to the local store to buy some candy, and gang initiation, they shot him twice in the back and killed him. They ditched the guns in a bucket behind some bushes. And even though there were no witnesses, because witnesses have a tendency to die at trial, we had a witness get executed in the parking lot once after testifying. So no one sees anything. You just, you don't ever witness anything. Someone called it in and told him where the guns were. So he gives me the guns, tells me to print them. I pulled up one beautiful print on each gun. So I went and told the detective that he better go buy a lottery ticket because he'll never see that again in his career. And I knew I'd never see it again in my career to have one on each gun at one homicide like that. And both fingerprints hit. We got both suspects. And that was actually the last trial that I testified on, which is a story I'd love to tell you later, but we'll answer more questions first.
Okay, what if you find, this is from Sherry. What if you find fingerprints, but there's no match in any base? Does that ever happen?
Oh, yes. We actually will scan them into APHIS. And at the time, I want to say.
Why don't you explain to us what APHIS is real quick?
Good point. The automated fingerprint identification system. We actually, at the time when I was working there, had a system that we shared with the sheriffs. And so anytime we got fingerprints or they got fingerprints, we scanned them in. We also had access to the California Department of Justice, and we could use LAFIS. I don't know what the L stands for, but that's the FBI's system. And we could get permission to go in and do a request from them. We didn't have access to their system, but we would send a request and then they would send fingerprints. So we had all of these at our disposal. We also could access the DMV if we had reason. We didn't just carte blanche access the DMV, which if you've ever had your fingerprints done at the DMV, they do live scan and they go bloop, and they take your fingerprint. And then the next person comes and goes bloop. Well, now you have a double tap, 2 fingerprints overlaying each other. And we can't use those. So every once in a while, they'll remember to clean the screen, which we always yell at them to make sure to clean the screens.
So what if you don't find something in one of those? You're welcome.
I know, so again, my brain. So if we scan in the fingerprints into APHIS and nothing hits, it's called a hit. Typically it will bring up the 10 closest fingerprints, and then we go back and look at it and see. We don't ever trust the computer because the computers can have, we don't do this anymore either, points where we'll take the fingerprint, say this is the fingerprint and send in my hand, And we'll say, oh, there's a point, there's a point, there's a point, there's a point, and we mark them. And we really mark as many as we can find. Points are bifurcations where an ending ridge goes like this, and then it splits into two ridges that continue around the fingerprint. There's dots, islands, or more than two cells that have grown together to create a dot. Then there's the basic ridges. We're looking at all these details. We're even looking at the space in between the ridges. But of course, fingerprints are pliable. Fingers, squish. So ridges can squish together if you put too much pressure. So that's why we don't kind of count points. The FBI officially dissolved that in 1975. And you still hear people say, well, how many points did you find? How many points did you find? We use a different system that's more holistic, that we look at the entire print. We look at the space in between the lines, all the dots, all the islands, everything. And we don't have to have 15 points to make a match, because APHIS has actually made matches where it had the 15 points that we said, okay, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one, just to help the computer. And it would say, here are the 10 closest matches. And even though they match with those points, one could be a whirl, one could be a loop, one could be an arch, and they're all completely different fingerprint patterns, but they have those same points in common. So that's why we don't totally depend on the machine, because it's a machine. And the points, the point system, we're still fighting that. People still remember that. They still do it on TV. It's just not a holistic approach. So if the fingerprints get into the system and they never come up to anybody, because if you haven't been arrested or fingerprinted for a job or anything like that, you're not in the system. And the fingerprints from arrests and the fingerprints from jobs are separate. We can access jobs, but that's a special thing. We have to get permission.
When you say permission, do you mean a search warrant?
Typically, yes. That's above my pay grade to do that. The detectives would probably get a search warrant, or at least permission somehow from, like, the DMV. I think they just have to do a written request, or my supervisor could do a written request. I never had to do that. Because it was higher than me. They didn't care what I had to say. But so the fingerprints, if they don't match, they just stay in the system. So we have all of these, we have two different types of fingerprints in the system. We have latent prints that are the fingerprints processed from crime scenes and brought back. And then we scan them in. And then we have fingerprints, known fingerprints that are from the arrest. And the computer's comparing the two. But at one point for training, it was kind of fun. I was working on cold cases where you just randomly rerun all these old fingerprints through the system and see if they match to anybody who's been arrested in the meantime. And a really cool case that we had when we first bought APHIS, they were going through the cold cases because they just needed to run some cases through the system to see if it worked. And they took all the homicides. And it was a 20-year-old homicide from Hollywood, and they got a hit and they arrested him. He never thought that he was going to get caught. He'd completely forgotten about the murder. He apparently was a little bit more straight and narrow at that point, but we caught him 20 years later.
Cool.
And so it's kind of cool to have the old fingerprints still floating around, because you never know.
Okay, just for the record, Wendy loves something you said. She was laughing out loud about it. So, but I don't know what it was. So there you go. Tom Orlando, first of all, before I ask his question, he also made a comment later down the list. He said he got a Marc Chagall at Goodwill for $12.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're my hero. Put your fingerprint on the back.
Okay, his question is, can you walk us through the contents of your kit?
Sure. Let's see. Figure out. That's it. Do you see okay like this?
A little far away.
Yeah, I'll just bring it.
I'm going to speaker view, people. If you aren't on it, that way her picture is bigger. Oh, that thing. Oh, wow.
Okay. The very lifeblood of a fingerprint kit is your powder. This is aluminum powder. All our stuff's toxic, everything. We use ground aluminum, ground iron shavings, and ground charcoal, which all together are the makings of gunpowder, which is fun if you want to freak out people, because everybody watches CSI and they try to tell us how to do our jobs. So that's a fun way to get them to back off a little. Just tell them everything's toxic and it's the makings of gunpowder, to back off and don't breathe it in. And depending on what kind of surface you're printing will depend on the kind of powder you pick. Aluminum works really great on smooth, shiny surfaces. Yay. This is my brush. They make a couple different types of brushes. This is the typical classic brush that you're going to see. And there's this technique and this technique. Ironically, I only brush this way with this hand and I only swirl with this hand. I don't do it the other way around. I don't know. I'm weird. And then tape. We have several different sizes tape, small tape. We have big tape for palm prints. We love palm prints. Fingerprints. You can kind of tell which hand a fingerprint comes from by the pattern. There's a pattern called a central pocket loop, which typically only occurs on this finger on the left hand. It does occur on other fingers, but it's a very rare fingerprint. I believe it's only 5% of the population that even has them. And that's the finger they occur on. That's number 4, number 9, finger number 9. Tape, which this is archival tape that we use. That way the fingerprints, the acid will never destroy the patterns and whatnot. We also have a mag brush, which you use with the magnetic powder, which was really cool. If I can find my mag brush, here it is. This is the magnetic brush, and you just pull it up like this, and the powder will stick here and create a little ball. This brush is really great when you're fingerprinting textured surfaces, because a fingerprint technically is 3-dimensional. And so if you're on a slightly 3-dimensional surface with a 3-dimensional fingerprint and you go across with powder, you're just going to fill in all of the texture and just have a mess. That's why this powder is great on smooth surfaces. For this one, the magnetic powder, you're using the wand and you don't even touch the surface. You just slightly go over it, and the pieces of iron, because they're a little bit thicker, they actually don't fill in like the fine powder, and will develop textured fingerprints on textured items. So we like to use it on wood grain windowsills when they're climbing through the window. This is the brush. And it's really cool when you pull this and the powder just goes poof and falls right off. It's also less flighty. This, by the end of the day, you'll see an outline of a mask, and I'm like, poof, powder. The black charcoal powder is also good. I don't like it because it's so flighty that you can add a little bit of the iron shavings to that powder to weight it down. So you learn little tricks like that. The black powder is also for smooth surfaces that you use it on contrasting. Obviously, if you use this powder on a light surface, you're not going to see very well. So you use the black powder, and then you stretch the tape across it and lift it, and then pull the tape off and put it on an opposite card. Black powder on a white card, aluminum powder on a black card. The magnetic powder goes on the white card also. And also in my kit, those are the main things: the tape, the brush, the powder. That's all I need to process a crime scene. But I also have scissors, a ruler, a notepad. There's other types of powders. There's you can see right there. That's a fluorescent green powder we use to process vehicles. And then we come in with a laser, an alternative light source. We only saved that for rapes and homicides, just because the amount of crime scenes we do, typically we just use the basic powder for the scenes. I also have in the back of my kit, there's, the little flap behind all of that, the folders to secure the fingerprints in. And I also have giant sticky paper that I can lift shoe impressions. Because, if you leave a dusty shoe impression on the floor, I can lift that. Or in the trunk, my car, I carry a whole extra kit and a homicide kit that has Dentaplast in it to do bite impressions. Not technically my job, but sometimes if the crims aren't there, they'll just have me do it. We do tire tracks. I have plaster Paris, and I'll bring tire tracks back, and then I just check them as evidence, and the criminalist in charge of tire tracks will then process it. They just don't come out to the scene. Most crime scenes have fingerprint people that we do more than anybody, then the photographers, and then the criminalists come out. They do the blood, gunshot, anything like that. But that's the basic kit.
Okay, you just reminded me. Let's go back to the a question that was asked a while ago. And that is, okay, so now you've got the call at your, there.
Yes.
Let's talk murder, because that's what most of us are murder mystery writers.
Okay.
Who's going to be on that team with you? You do fingerprints. Who's going to be on that team with you that goes to the scene? Do you all go together? Do you all show up in your different cars? How does that work?
We all show up separately. First, the initial police officers respond because they'll receive the call. They go to the scene and secure it, making sure that the bad guys aren't there anymore. That
Or
the
hiding
victim-
in closets with jaws blown off, yeah.
Exactly. Or make sure that there's no medical help that needs to be needed. Ambulances will not, EMTs, they won't respond to a crime scene, at least in LA, unless the police are there to secure it. Because it's just not safe. At the LA riots, the firemen, they were shooting the firemen. Luckily, I think no one got shot, or maybe one, but they were shooting at the firemen. So the police officers always respond first to make sure everything's safe, no one needs medical care, and then if we need EMTs, they'll respond next. For a homicide, by the time I get there, usually, always fingerprints will be there. Sometimes photographers will be there. Then on down the food chain, no offense to them, they'll be really mad that I said that. But then you get to the criminalists. They might have DNA come out. We never see the firearms people. They stay in the lab. They'll have someone that comes out for DNA. They'll collect the firearms and just take it back to the firearms people because there's no need for them to leave the lab. If they
Even if they
out-
want to find where stray bullets went?
Exactly, trajectory. That would be something. If there's bullets in the wall, or they need to check their trajectory, how they get the sticks and they put it in, or they can use lasers, then they will come out for that. But that's way after the fact usually. Most often you're going to get fingerprints. At least I'm speaking obviously specifically about LAPD because the amount of crime scenes that we actually process. And it's definitely a family reunion when we get there and everybody's there. It gets a little crazy sometimes. And we have to try to keep decorum because, we're all warped because that's how your mind processes this. We compartmentalize like crazy, but we also are definitely warped. I did a quadruple homicide in the projects and the coroner showed up to process the bodies. And of course, we gave each other hugs. We're like, oh wait, there's too many TV cameras. So we're catching up real quick where the cameras can put us on the 5 o'clock news hugging at a quadruple homicide.
Yeah.
And so then we're going through the scene and now it's her scene because she's the coroner. And so I'm waiting for her. And
So you guys get there before the coroner?
Yes, oh, we're always waiting on the coroner's office.
Okay.
And we cannot touch a body without the medical examiner. So
Okay.
the body will sit there until the coroner gets there. And the coroner is the entire county of Los Angeles, not just the city. And so they even go to Catalina Island and all the areas that we don't go to. So the coroner is always busy. We always wait for them, and the FBI.
Okay,
Always wait.
back to your team that you're on. Is this a time when they start looking at the blood spatters? Or
Yes.
blood splatters? Gotta
I
use
know,
the
I
right
do
term.
that too. There's
Blood
a hierarchy.
splatter.
Blood spatter
No, blood spatters is the verb.
on the walls.
No,
blood
when
spatter.
it goes, when it shoots off the body, it's spattering.
Right,
When
spatter.
it hits the wall, it says a splatter.
But we don't call it that.
Okay.
You're correct. You are correct. That's
Oh.
splatter on the wall, but we just call it spatter.
Okay, I love you. Thank you. I got nailed by a tech one time about that.
No, is that what they said?
Oh yes, yes.
Wow. See, LAPD say that's not right. And that brings us to the old saying, the right way, the wrong way, and the LAPD way.
Ah.
Everybody has their own rules. We
So anyway,
rather-
when does that person show up?
They typically would show up kind of mid-scene because there's a hierarchy. First the scene gets secured, and then the detectives will usually, if we're talking a good, decent homicide that everybody's showing up at, good, decent homicides. Homicides are going to have anywhere from probably 5 police officers, detective, and fingerprints up to 100 people. When that police officer got murdered, basically, he was shot 1 inch below his bulletproof vest and died. There were over 100 police officers and detectives and people who weren't even on duty showed up at that scene. That entire neighborhood was LAPD. And we finally found the guy, and he attempted suicide because he had been arrested 8 prior times for assault and battery and killing a police officer. They were going to get the death penalty. And so he committed suicide. We got blamed for that too, that we faked it, but we didn't. But anyway, so the hierarchy would be police, detectives, for homicide, next photographers, because they're going to photograph everything exactly how it is before anything gets touched or processed. That's really important to preserve the scene, show it to the jury, go back for reference, all those obvious reasons, photograph everything. So we're always waiting for the photographers to finish because they're critical. After that, then you're going to have the DNA people come through, and they're taking blood samples and checking for trace DNA, where something, if you touch it with your mouth, that's trace DNA. There's different types of names, for the different types of DNA, touch DNA, trace DNA, blah, blah, blah. Ooh, that was actually touch DNA, not my department. So they come through and do all the DNA, and then they'll collect any casings and whatnot. We might fingerprint the casings before they take them back to firearms if they want us to. Crims will tell fingerprints what to do. They're kind of higher than us because they're doing the DNA and the firearms. So they'll make a lot of decisions. If the detectives aren't breathing down our necks, then, and the crims are there, they will tell us what to do. Because the criminalists have the degrees in biochemistry, chemistry, biology, and so all of that is their realm. I'm just fingerprints, so I'll.
So are you called a crime scene technician then?
I'm sorry?
What is your title? There's criminologists, then are you crime scene techs? Or
Depends who you ask. My title was forensic print specialist, and I was a level 3, which is the highest you can get without being a supervisor. And I'm not crazy, not going to be a supervisor. But we were forensic investigators, forensic specialists.
investigators. Okay.
I'm considered a fingerprint expert under both Daubert challenges and Fry, the Fry challenge. I would be considered an expert under both of those. So then, as we call them crims, as the criminalists, they finish up doing DNA or anything like that, then we're allowed to come through and destroy the scene. Because once fingerprints is done, the house looks like, and especially the one where the officer was shot, that apartment was completely black. I fingerprinted from above the door jambs all the way down, the entire door, all the way down, every single door in the apartment, both sides, just everything. We were there until 5 o'clock in the morning processing that crime scene. And so that's, the hierarchy. Fingerprints always goes last because we're destructive.
Okay, got 2 more questions here for you.
Okay.
Pat Kelly wants to know, are vehicles good sources of fingerprints?
Yes. Windows are great for fingerprints. Doors are great for fingerprints. Door handles, no. When you're writing, just remember, take into account how you handle something, how you touch it. If you're going to reach inside something and open it, then you're leaving palm prints inside the door handle, but we can't get those. Also, how many times has that been touched? Each time you're depositing more of the substrate, more of the matrix onto the substrate, and the fingerprints just keep piling up until the surface gets cleaned. And so certain surfaces, you can, touch a window, the middle of the window right on the outside is always touched like this. Sometimes there's so many fingerprints we can't even tell anymore. There is a computer system now, a program that will take the fingerprints and separate them out. That's after I left, but I'm pretty sure that does exist now. TV loves to make up stuff when we're like, ooh, we wish we had that. Too bad it doesn't exist. But the vehicles are really great just because the nature of smooth surfaces, glass, metal, fiberglass, plastic. If it's textured, it's not going to be good. You would use the mag brush and try, or you can use super glue. If it's a homicide, we'll bring it back to a print shed, which is a secured location, and then we could super glue it, or use the green powder right here and use a laser, an alternative light source, to make it fluoresce. And then you can see the glowing fingerprints. Inside the vehicle, seats, probably not good. If they're leather, maybe. You would want to do super glue on leather because leather is a porous item. It can absorb fingerprints and it's got a slight texture to it. So if you're going to do it there, depending on the color, you could use the aluminum powder. I would use the mag powder unless it's black seats. Then I'm going to use the aluminum across my fingers. Properly, you would want to do super glue. But we just don't always have that opportunity, that they kind of pick and choose who gets the primo processing. We don't carry the super glue wand with us just because it's so dangerous to use. The LAPD chose not to allow us to do that. They might by now, I don't know. Inside CDs, they always rifle through your CDs. I don't know what that's about, but we get so many fingerprints off CDs, soda cans. I got fingerprints off of a porn box. Of course, I had to eliminate all the people who touched the porn box. And then I got my suspect. It was Suge Knight. I didn't say his name, but it was Suge Knight. It was when he and Snoop Dogg got in a fight. This was my first armed robbery. And he and Suge Knight Suge Knight and Snoop Dogg got in a fight. And allegedly, Suge Knight put out the order to rob Snoop Dogg's studio, the Dog Pound, and steal back all this equipment and stuff. And so I was processing the van with my supervisor because I am a training officer, because I wasn't even allowed to do that yet. And I wasn't signed off on them yet. And she's like, no, you're really good. Just do it. I'll watch you. If anything happens, it's my fault because I should have told you. So I'm processing it. And first thing you know, I find his ID and I'm all Marion, so I bag that to give, print it, bag it. And I find the porno box like, oh, so I'm, extra pair of gloves, processing that. It's like, oh, we'll burn this brush when we're done. Because it's obviously most likely not full of biologicals, but you just can't help but think gross, and we have a sense of humor about stuff and they just kind of creepy. So I got tons of fingerprints off of that, which was hysterical. And that was, my first armed robbery for the takeover robbery for that. You might as well go for the gusto and make it a famous. Yeah, I looked for that and I know, yay! I looked for that in the newspapers and never even found it. I was so disappointed. I've been collecting my cases when I can find them, and that one never even made it into the news, which is interesting because that's a good juicy one. And everybody knew they were in a spat and what happened, but the reporters never picked up on it. But yes, vehicles are great for fingerprints. The trick though, and this is a good one for you to use, you'll hear them greasing a car. And I can smell WD-40 a mile away because, where'd my brush go? If I'm using a brush made out of camel hair or ostrich feathers, I like the synthetic ones, and I'm processing a vehicle and I hit WD-40, I'm dead in the water. Just destroyed my $25 brush. I might have another brush on me, hopefully, if I haven't already destroyed it. Like we were talking about earlier, you can easily wipe away fingerprints, but so they'll wipe down vehicles, but the smart guys will go back with WD-40, spray that, wipe it down. And now not only have you dissolved the saltwater prints, but oil on oil, you've destroyed the sebaceous prints, which we love sebaceous prints because they're thicker, they're clearer, they last longer, they're more durable, but they can't withstand oil. And so they'll grease the cars by spraying them with WD-40. So we'll get a car, the entire car will be one giant grease ball. And that makes us mad. And we'll try that much harder and print unusual things that normally we don't print just to beat them. We do have kind of set things. I can look at a house, just kind of looking around. We always have the person tell us, not at a homicide, but at like a burglary. We'll have them tell us, okay, where'd they get in? Show me what they touched. And sometimes I'll pick out stuff. I'm like, did they move that? Oh yeah, they did. I didn't even notice. How'd you know? Well, it's my job to know. I've been to 6,000 of these. But we can tell usually within like 5 minutes if we're going to get something. And we'll still print even though we know none of the items are printable, because we try. It's too important for us not to. And that was part of my interview. What are you going to do in 5 years? Well, if I still love it, I'll be here. When I lose my heart for this, I'll quit because it's too important. And I'm huge on that. That once those people in the crime lab, once they're burned out, leave. And that's what happened to me. I got burned out, I left. I still love it. I'm passionate for it, but they burned me out because they left me in the field too long.
Well, actually, that leads to the next question. And I'm afraid who was it that sent this one? Kelly. No, Kelly's got a different thing. That's a very good thing for you to have, Kelly. From Helen Fanek. Talk to us. How long were you at the LAPD, and were you always doing the same thing and all that kind of stuff?
I did my senior thesis on LAPD. So that was my introduction while I was still attending Parsons LA campus, which is no longer there. New York didn't like LA. I also attended, I know, because Parsons is in New York, but it used to be Parsons, New York, Paris, and Los Angeles. So I studied in Los Angeles and Paris, France. But so while I was doing my senior thesis in photography, I actually followed LAPD around. And so that was a year right there. And Rodney King went down while I was following LAPD photographing them. Obviously, I wasn't there. But that was interesting because it changed the way they looked at me. Because before that, they're like, oh yeah, you're here to take pictures, you're documenting us, yay, cool. After that, they're like, oh, you're here because you want to make us look bad. Oh, you're just trying to catch us. Like, dude, I've been here before that went down. I actually worked on that trial, pulling photos from the video for Stacey Coons for that. I actually had the one trial photos in the guest bedroom. That was a crazy mess. Good thing that happened, just because it really brought to light about issues.
Well, how long were you with LAPD then?
My actual service years was 6 3/4 service years. And that's where I did over 6,000 crime scenes and over 30,000 fingerprint analysis. And then I had my thesis, and yeah. And that felt like forever, but it felt like a split second.
Well, Kelly Manfredini, bless her heart, has put up the link to your book. Maybe hold that cover up for us one more time and kind of give us just a quick overview of what's in it.
This is my crease one. This is the red one. I have 2 versions because I self-published and I was naive. This book, because I'm a photographer, has my photos in the background. Oh, these photos right here, that is the first official police action occurring at the corner of Florence and Normandy, which is the flashpoint of the LA riots. And after the riots ended, LAPD chose to do, this is a sobriety checkpoint, and LAPD chose that intersection to do the sobriety checkpoint to make a statement. We're back, we're here, surprise, here we are. And these pictures are of the officer doing, touch your nose, lean back, touch your nose. Oh, you're drunk, I'm gonna handcuff you. I missed the last photo because as the officer was handcuffing the guy, he reached into, tightened the handcuffs and found a gun and yelled, gun, and we all hit the ground because we didn't know. So I missed the last photo, shame on me. So anyway, back to being naive.
Yes.
This book, just to print it, is $18 because it's full color. It has the color photos in the back. So I printed a second book. This one is just my stories, exact same book. And I make it clear in all my listings and whatnot that the blue book is just stories and the red book is has the special edition gallery in the back. Because I can print this one for $4 versus $18 out of pocket just to start. And of course, if you're on Amazon, you don't get a lot of royalties from the books. And so that's my little note on self-publishing. But I love it because I'm a control freak. I don't want someone creating my cover. I don't want someone changing my verbiage. I need a better editor because I can't type to save my life. So there were some typos that slipped through past the editor that I was using. A friend. Hiring an editor is awesome. But otherwise, I love self-publishing because I have control. And no one changed anything unless I wanted it changed.
Well, if I can, just for the record, we'd love to have you back if you wanted to hear this presentation. But we are having in April Logistics of Self-Publishing 101, and they're talking about editors.
Oh, it was Kate, wasn't it?
Yes, it's Kate Lawley.
So long.
Yeah, well, jump on in. All you have to do is go to the West Bank Library, just like you did today. Go to their website and then come in through the calendar.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was self promotion there for our chapter.
Yeah. It's fun. Self-publishing is fun.
Okay, guys, I need last minute comments. We are less than 5 minutes away from the end of our time. So anybody have any why don't you all unmute yourselves and just give her a round of applause for starters.
Yay. Thank you
Our
so much.
book.
This has
Oh, yay,
been
there's my
so
blue
much
book.
fun. I write historical fiction, but I've been loving all these stories, and somehow some part of it will come out somewhere. I mean, all my stuff is pre-fingerprints. but still loving every minute of it. It's so much fun
thank
to
you.
listen to your crazy career. I mean, just wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a total treat. Kelly Manfredini, you've proved yourself as a program coordinator extraordinaire. And Kathy, just thank you. You are darling and so informative. You have got so much information. My gosh, I think we could have gone another 3 hours.
Well, and thank you for keeping me on track. My spouse is like so linear that she's all the time. And then there's me, blah, 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 blah. So you did a great job keeping me focused. Because you see, I get so enthralled telling you my stories that I forget what I was telling you.
Well, and you have so many to tell, so it's okay. Well, everybody, wait. I see 2 more chat little thingies. Hold on. From Wendy, to everyone, awesome, thank you. And Maureen, we are so glad to have you back at West Bank Library doing all your magic with the tech stuff, my dear. And hello to Simon. Can you hold him up a little bit?
Hi, boogers.
Absolutely.
There's
Oh,
Simon.
congrats. Oh, look at that smile.
So, and Pat Kelly says, thank you. This was fantastic. And
Yes,
that's the perfect words to end this on. Thank you so much, Kathy DeYoung
No
and
problem.
Kelly
Thank you,
Manfredini.
Kathy.
No
Take care,
problem.
y'all.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.